of the documentary film Inhuman from Skywatch TV and Defender Films. In studio with me are the two principals actually in the film, Skywatch TV President Tom Horn and our science advisor Sharon K. Gilbert. Welcome.
Thank you.
Transhumanism. I had the opportunity to speak to a college course, advanced technology course at Eastern Illinois University several months ago. Students from all over the world whose degree was going to be in advanced global technology, emerging technologies. And of the 30 that I talked to, only 2 of them had even heard the term transhuman. What does the word mean? So we can have this conversation with our viewers. What does it mean?
Yeah, well, by the way, great to be here with Derek and Sharon Gilbert, 2 of my favorite people in the world, and to talk about this product, Inhuman. You know, this has been a 5-year product. How in the world I ever wound up involved in this is a story all by itself that they'll learn, I guess, when they watch the film, because I sure don't have no degrees in science, right? But I did. I wound up in this circle. Here I am, and people will go on that journey in the movie Inhuman, but they'll also find out why I reached out to Sharon, who has degrees in biology, and said, help! Yeah. You know?
And find out why my father said to me more than once, son, you married up.
Yeah, I've heard you say that a few times. I think you're right too, Derek. We both did. But yeah, and you started this program talking about this candidate for U.S. president, Zoltan Istvan. Zoltan. And, you know, he emailed me while we were producing this film because he wanted to be part of the documentary too. And we were too far into the interviews to be able to do that. But yeah, the subject, transhumanism. Now you said that, you know, what did you say? Only 2 out of
30 in this class, in a class called Global Technology, and this was a graduate level course.
Yeah, knew what the term even stood for. Right. But we've learned that if you were to walk into a church and say, tell me what transhumanism is, it's just pretty much dumb silence. And yet, the level of importance and the ways in which this philosophy as a replacement religious idea, but also its sense of how we're going to use technology in the future to change what God made. Yeah. All of creation is already either being altered, genetically modified foods. You've done some shows already where you had Joe Artis and Donna Howell in here talking about how the GMOs are also a part of the food products that animals are eating. It's changing their DNA.
Yes.
It's rewriting creation, right? But we also know that at the embryonic level, we're doing experiments with human-animal chimeras. Some of these scientists have hinted that some of their rogue friends are already raising these to full maturity. So this implies that there could even be islands of Dr. Moreau, and all the way, you know, the Academy of Medical Sciences out of Britain. So this is a prestigious body saying that literally thousands of animals containing human material are in laboratories now being tested. So the genie is out of the bottle, but the next step is what Zoltan is running for a U.S. president to try to promote, and that is we also are going to start changing humankind. We're going to fix and repair. We're going to extend our lifespans. We're going to use technology, and the military is getting involved with this too.
Very much so, and this is nothing more than repackaged eugenics. If that's a familiar term to you, it's because something that Hitler did, but guess what? It started here in the United States, in Indiana, California, New York, Cold Spring Harbor, at Stanford, at IU. There were a lot of professors back at the turn of the 20th century who believed, scientists who were well respected, who believed that certain types of individuals were a drain on society, and in order to make mankind more robust, stronger, try to achieve that godhood that was promised in Genesis by the Nakash, by the enemy of mankind, that you shall be as gods. This was a dream that Hitler just borrowed from the United States.
Right, and the eugenics,
we're calling it transhumanism.
Yes, it's eugenics with a science fiction gloss. It never really went away, but of course it got a bad reputation after what the Nazis did in the 1930s and 1940s. But today, in fact, Mr. Istvan, who's running for president on the Transhumanist Party ticket, has already published an article, which has been out on the internet for months now, calling for a restriction on breeding, human breeding. because it is perceived by some in this movement that in order to guarantee the long-term survival of humanity, we need to eliminate the possibility of climate change, which they believe, or starvation, global hunger or disease, which they believe is the result of too many people, and especially too many of the wrong kind of people.
Well, there was a scientist at the end of the 19th century in Great Britain called Malthus, and he believed
Thomas
that,
Malthus.
Exactly, he believed that if there were too many people on the planet, we would cease to exist as a species, and therefore you had to control the numbers. Well, if you're going to control the numbers, let's make sure the numbers that survive are the ones we pick.
fittest.
Sure, and of course that was right at the heart of the Nazi eugenic movement.
Yes.
But as you say, it was also born. Hitler actually learned an awful lot from what we were doing in the U.S.
Well, in fact,
in selective breeding and so on.
The Nazis took their program from a model. They modeled it on the program that was in place in the state of California.
Right.
So it was. I mean, we Americans can look back at Hitler's Germany and with a sense of moral superiority. Well, we stopped Hitler. We inspired Hitler.
Right. That's right.
So let's get down off the high horse here.
And here's another thing that's very interesting about this. It has kind of an occultic undertone to it.
Yes.
There was a natural progress in Nazi Germany to go from we're going to selectively breed the Aryan super race, we're going to create the right kind of people, into another kind of occultism, which this program doesn't have enough time to go into all the bits and details of that, but the bottom line is, at the heart of it, it is Luciferian.
Yes.
It is an assault on God's creation. God made something, and God ordered that we're going to put barriers between the species, and each kind's going to reproduce only after its own kind. And then even in our own fallen state, Jesus came to the earth as a man. He could have came as a demigod, an Ubermensch, Superman. He came as a man to redeem fallen humanity. So God has a method that brings us to this point where the transhumanists want to take us to, right? Yes. Transcendence, a moment when we're going to go beyond this weak flesh that we live in now, and we're going to become something that is eternal, and we're going to have eternal life, right? Ray Kurzweil was back in the news again this week, speaking as one of Google's executives. And what was he saying? We're going to inject nanobots into our systems and into our brain, and we are going to become godlike. We're going to get in touch with the divine, right? So there is an occultic aspect as well to what we're talking about here in this assault on on genetics, on creation.
Very much so. When we had Michael Heiser here just recently, he talked, and I think his programs are going to actually air after this, so hang in there. It'll be January, I think. But he was discussing with us how essentially sex magic was used in the ancient world to change your DNA. There's something metaphysical about DNA. Well, now we know there's something called epigenetics, and it's possible that there's a metagenetics that goes beyond what we can measure in a laboratory that can actually make changes in your DNA. I know that things we eat, you talked about it with Donna Howell and Joe Artis about how things that animals are now eating, where they're eating GMO corn over and over and over and over again, that's starting to change the DNA in the animal. If you think that just because you haven't lined up for some kind of a shot at a clinic that you are exempt from this, it's too late. The genie is out of the bottle, and the things we're eating, the medicines we're taking, are changing us.
Well, and of course, again, the movie Inhuman, the documentary, and the book Dead Pets Don't Lie. We can only do so many programs.
We only have so much time.
We've only got so much time, and so we're just kind of highlighting some of the major points around this. But the other point that I would want to make is to people viewing this program that are unfamiliar with these terms, especially people in most of the institutions aspects of the church, they're not being taught anything about transhumanism. I had a prophecy preacher not long ago tell me, well, God will never allow this to happen. God would never allow them to do experiments where humans and animals are being blended in the laboratory. And I looked at him and said, this is happening now in thousands of laboratories. It's in our military budgets. It's in DARPA's presidentially approved budget this year.
There are prophecies in the Bible that talk about the mingling of seed. Their seed will mingle with human seed. Who are they?
Right.
Yes.
And in fact, I think the Hebrew word there it's zera or vera, I forget, but it actually means progeny. And it raises this astonishing idea, right, that the devil can have progeny, can have seed. What in the world are we talking about?
Yes.
And yet, the further you get into transhumanism and the genetics revolution, and you realize that there is a point at which you could alter something that looks human, but its genetic makeup is not anything like what God breathed into and called something after his own image.
Right.
It's something entirely different. Well, now that sounds like the Nephilim. That sounds like what the Watchers did. And we find out if the legends around that are true, which do seem to be supported by the Old Testament, they could not be redeemed. Therefore, they didn't have a human soul. They didn't have a redeemable aspect. So in every way, we're talking about some very, very dangerous science here, not just in the sense of how it might risk our health, but supernaturally, spiritually, eternally. We're talking about something here that's outside the box.
Yes, and we'd like to make this available to you. As we'll show you in just a minute how you can get a copy of this new documentary film, Inhuman, from Defender Films and Skywatch TV. It's a 3-hour film that delves deep into what it means to be transhuman and looks at it from pro and con. Tom and the investigative team went out and talked with a number of experts on both sides of the issue to give a rounded picture and to make sure that arguments on both sides were framed correctly. In other words, the opposing viewpoints were not misrepresented. We'll tell you more about that in just a moment. But as part of the package, Tom, I know that we're giving away some what we're calling mystery books as part of the package. Can you give us an example of what some of the books are as part of this package?
Yeah, because when a person watches the commercial, they're going to see the products that they're going to receive, which is such a huge pile of stuff.
Gigantic.
The biggest giveaway we've ever done.
You really are crazy, Tom.
I know. But by the way, the price of Inhuman and Dead Pets Don't Lie, the retail is actually $45, and we're making that available for $39.95. So we're already discounting that. And then in addition to that, we're giving away $300+ worth of other products. So they're going to see the commercial about that in a moment. But there's this one part in the commercial where it says, and also we're going to give you 2 mystery books. So what people need to understand is the mystery books are simply from our overstock. I grabbed some of that as I was coming in. It could be this book, Survive the Unthinkable, A Total Guide to Women's Self-Protection. Here's another one of them that's out there in overstock right now, Jack Graham's Unseen.
Oh, that's a really good book.
Fabulous book, hardback book. Another one that's in the news this week, actually, Discovering the City of Sodom. And you might have saw where some of the most recent research, they think they have found remains from where the fire fell down from heaven. There's that book. The Disaster Survival Bible. There's some of these great big huge researcher library books that are also out there in overstock, the Septuagint, the Apocrypha, some of Steve Quayle's giant books. So the bottom line is when they see in the commercial where it says 2 mystery books, we can't tell you what those titles are going to be. They're going to be worth at least $40, but they could be worth significantly more than that, and that's coming out of overstock.
And you will not get to pick
You don't get to pick what the 2 mystery books are, but everything else will be described in the commercial. And then also, very quickly, The Last Pope. This is a full-on documentary. Was produced by WorldNet Daily Films. The Pope, as you know, has been in the news a lot. This goes really into the prophetic possibilities about what is happening in the Vatican, what's happening with this Pope. But we only have 3,000 of those to give away. So you're going to get $300 worth of product, but the first 3,000 people are also going to get the brand new documentary from WorldNet Daily Films. And so now we'll let you watch the commercial.
Coming exclusively from Skywatch TV for a very limited time starting November 17th, 2015. When you purchase the new documentary film Inhuman and the companion book Dead Pets Don't Lie from Skywatch TV, you'll receive the largest giveaway in Skywatch TV history. An unprecedented $300 in free books, audio sets, and DVDs to add to your library or to give away as gifts during this holiday season. Included in this limited time giveaway are never before offered free audio sets. Over 30 hours of the most sought after interviews in history with global experts combined on a special 2-disc volume set discussing the unfolding genetic Armageddon now underway and what you need to know to survive the future. Featuring Something Transhumanism This Way Comes, The Coming Replacement Humans, The Days of Noah, The coming zombie apocalypse. Conspiracy theory. Psychotronic warfare. Also, for a very limited time, in addition to the never-before-offered free best-selling audio sets, if you order before this special offer expires, you'll also receive the multi-part Skywatch TV special investigative report on Inhuman the documentary and Dead Pets Don't Lie, the award-winning book Forbidden Gates, Pandemonium's Engine, the best-selling DVD by dog behavior expert Joe Ardis, The Natural Dog Training Method, the breakthrough book for pet enthusiasts everywhere, Do Our Pets Go to Heaven? 2 additional mystery books with a $40 value. And if you're one of the first 3,000 customers to...
I'm a complete layperson, and you've helped me a lot on this, and I can imagine people watching this right now, and the ones out there that have degrees in science know everything you're talking about.
Maybe they're
then
probably
the guys
going,
like me
"I
are
don't know
going,
about
what? DNA and DNA. But essentially what you're saying is it's a way of kind of clipping and inserting new information.
It's like cut and paste.
Into your cutting and pasting into your DNA so that you can actually start re-engineering the genetic code. This can happen at the germline level.
It can, and that's called gene drive. They use the same method, but they actually go for any organism that reproduces sexually, got an ovum and a sperm. They will, you can go in a lab and you can, with a mosquito is where they're using it right now, because this is all over the place. Got to get rid of the mosquitoes in this major malaria area. So they make sure that progeny carry a defective gene. So they will slowly die out. This is a way to have your kids and grandkids forever inherit a new gene that's either inserted or altered. Now, there are different types of gene drive. One of those is called rogue drive, and that is intended to disrupt the species, disrupt the receiver of that new gene. In other words, it's biowarfare on steroids.
Wow.
Biowarfare at the germline level.
At the germline level.
That's genocide.
Because
or speciescide.
Let me tell you how you get these things into the body, into the cell. You use an adenovirus.
An adenovirus is...
An adenovirus is called...
something that's very easily transmissible.
It's the very common virus.
It's frightening because as we're talking about what we've discussed here, we're kind of talking about the Terminator scenario where we create these super soldiers that would be able to dominate us. We're also talking about something like the Stephen King novel, The Stand.
Very much
where
like
a biological weapon
that
spreads in the wild.
like the flu or the cold.
Right, but is able to do much more damage. But at the bottom line, and maybe we can do this in another program, that this is a 21st century religion. And while there are Christians who will say, you know, as your pastor friend said, the Lord will never allow this to happen. And that may be true, but it doesn't really matter. What matters is that there are well-meaning Christians, and we're starting to see some of this out there. There's a growing Christian Transhumanist Association. Right. There are other so-called religious transhumanists like the Mormons, and we can explain why this would appeal to Mormons, I suppose, as well, that are being drawn in to a belief system that teaches them that somehow we will achieve immortality, we will achieve godhood, or we will achieve God's prophetic purposes, our eschatological purposes through technology.
Yeah, I noticed they're even using that term, eschatological.
Exactly, and so there's some real danger there, because if people are being drawn away from faith alone, in Christ alone, they're being drawn into a path that could lead to eternal damnation. And that is what we are warning about. That is why we feel so strongly about this. The new documentary, Inhuman, from Defender Films and Skywatch TV, available beginning November 17th, and we hope you will share them with your friends. There are many issues that face the world today, many that confront us as Christians today. This is a sea change in what it means to be human, God's creation redesigned. Thank you for watching as we keep watch. For Tom Horn and Sharon Gilbert, I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is Skywatch TV.
angels waging war in the unseen realm. Global events fulfilling biblical prophecy. Eternal life. What lies beyond mortality? From analyzing the paranormal from a biblical worldview to the discussion of cutting-edge science and technology. Conspiracy. Discovery. Special investigative reports. Unafraid to explore the challenging issues facing humanity. Welcome to another edition of Skywatch TV.
Humanity will achieve immortality by the year 2045. Welcome to Skywatch TV. I'm Derek Gilbert. This is our special report, Genetic Armageddon, how science is fundamentally transforming what it means to be human and what it means for us in this brave new world as Christians. We're getting ready to release the new documentary film, Inhuman. The next and final phase of man is here. From Defender Films and Skywatch TV, and with us in studio, the man who's at the center of the story, Tom Horn, and the narrator and science advisor for the project, Sharon K. Gilbert. Welcome.
Thank you.
The prediction that mankind would achieve immortality by 2045, Dr. Raymond Kurzweil. One of the things I think surprises people when we start discussing this in a church setting, Sharon and I have had this experience a number of times, eyes start to glaze over and people assume that we're talking about science fiction. But when we explain that the gentleman who made this prediction, considered the most brilliant inventor in the United States of the last 50 years, was just recently hired as the director of engineering by the most powerful technology company on the planet, Google, which knew what they were getting in Dr. Kurzweil because Google is a founding corporate sponsor of Dr. Kurzweil's Singularity University.
Right.
And the technological singularity being that moment at which human-machine integration allows us to transcend the limitations of our biology, because God's design is so flawed, of course. But we also know that this technology is being researched heavily by the military. Now, Sharon, we're reading a book right now by Annie Jacobson, an investigative journalist called The Pentagon's Brain, about the history of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency.
It's an eye-opener.
What have you found in that book that really made you stop and
There were a couple of things. You heard me last night while I was reading. I actually laughed out loud because one of the things just seemed so ludicrous. One of the first things that really hit me, and this is a serious point, is that the science that we see in the news every day, if it's gotten to the New York Times, then more than likely it's at least 40 years old. It's been researched and field tested by DARPA for many, many decades before we actually find out about it. So the transhumanism science that we've been talking about, that's been around for a while and it's been tested. The only thing that is relatively new is CRISPR. The other thing I laughed about was the idea that somehow in order to battle against incoming ICBMs from Russia back in the 1950s, a young physicist came up with the idea of, well, let's just deploy a whole bunch of nuclear weapons up into the stratosphere. Let's explode them, and then the neutrinos and other particles that are formed by that will fry the electronics of the ICBMs coming in. Did you think about what's going to happen to us?
Yeah.
That's when they discovered what an EMP was.
Yeah. Well, and that whole question, have you really thought this through? Have you really
That's
thought?
just it.
And when, as we learned in producing this documentary, Inhuman, when you can finally get a sit down. DARPA, by the way, at one point was going to talk with us, but when they found out where we were coming from, especially when they found out that we have a Christian eschatological worldview, then the door was shut and no thank you. But we were still able to sit down with people like Professor Hurlbut, who sits on the U.S. President's Council on Bioethics, and others, but he also happens to be a Christian.
Yes.
And so he was, warm to where we were coming from. But when you talk to them, you find out that if you say, okay, so you start using CRISPR technology and gene drive, like Sharon Gilbert was talking about in the last program that we did. This could set in motion some environmental changes that could start eradicating forms of life. We say the balance of Mother Nature could create a vacuum in the environment, issues, prion contamination, disease strains that cross over from animals to humans, things like that. But their answer to it is basically this. They say, yes, but our enemies, our competitors, they are working overnight right now to develop this technology, and if we don't prepare to be able to match them or to compete with them on the battlefield, then they will dominate it and threaten our way of life.
Well, and that very reason is given for researching artificial intelligence, that we as the United States, we have to be the first ones that have these strong AI that emerges, because if we don't, China or somebody else is going to get it, and they're going to take control.
Right. And if people think that, again, we're overstating the case, that was one of the things that jumped out at me about the Annie Jacobsen book, The Pentagon's Brain. When the hydrogen bomb was developed in the early 1950s, 1954, some very prominent physicists, Enrico Fermi, for who the Fermi Lab in the Chicago area is named, the particle accelerator, went to President Truman and said, this is evil. We cannot build this. There is no purpose for a weapon this powerful except to wipe out entire populations. And yet, they were overruled because the prevailing thought within the defense establishment at the time was that if we don't develop this, our enemies will. Those godless communists will have no problem doing something like this to us. In fact, Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, the first hydrogen bomb actually turned out to be much stronger than they thought it was going to be. Freaked out the scientists in the bunker because the explosion keeps growing. We may have set the entire atmosphere.
They barely got out of there.
They barely got out alive. They were looking for a 6 megaton explosion. They got a 15 megaton explosion. They went back to the president and said, we've developed a design for a 15,000 megaton, a continent destroyer.
Right.
Why? Because we have to do it, or the communists will do it first. Why? 60 years later, when we're talking about these types of weapon systems, autonomous, super intelligent AIs guiding weapon systems. This is the acronym LAWS, lethal autonomous weapon systems, are being developed for the battlefield. Why? Because if we don't, the Russians, the Chinese, or
so this is what some of the top think tanks in the world right now,
like
the Jasons
like
that we've referred to
and
before.
By the way, there really is a group called the Jasons.
Yes.
In fact, the
it's
woman
in the book,
she's one of the people that's responsible for chronicling the history
Annie
of
Jacobsen.
DARPA. Talks about the Jasons, admits that they're there and they exist. And the Jasons, so you have this top think tank. They don't like to be identified as to who they are. That's what makes them controversial, and some people think, they're bigger than life, and so therefore they can't really actually even exist. But they have been quoted, and some of their white papers that they've produced for DARPA and the Defense Department and so on, some of that's been leaked on occasion to like Wired magazine and people like that then publicize it. And that's the argument they're making. We have to get ahead of this technology. In fact, a few years ago, DARPA said that if the United States was not ahead in this technology by the year 2012, so now we're 3 years past that moment, they said we would fall irreparably behind and we would never catch up. So who are they talking about? Well, certainly they're talking about China, most likely Russia, and some of the other national powers that are secretly, quietly developing genetic technologies, weaponized forms of living organisms, right? So this is biotechnological advances. But when you look at the line items in their budget, like DARPA, the last 3 years, their presidentially approved budget, it's got millions and millions of dollars set aside to create a blueprint for altering humans, creating new forms of humanity, genetically modifying humans. And we know that the Chinese are already experimenting using CRISPR technology to modify humans, at least at the embryonic level, if not more so.
And one of the things that came out in the interview with Annie Jacobsen, which I did just last week, that surprised me and she said really disturbed her, was that DARPA is experimenting with what they're calling neurological, that's not the
interfaces?
Neurotherapeutic
implants.
Right,
yeah.
Where they are implanting chips into the human brain, into the brains of soldiers who've been injured and cognitively damaged, soldiers who suffered head trauma, some of whom are profoundly impaired in a vegetative state. Their goal, and this is a noble goal, because they want to restore cognitive function to soldiers who've been injured. And I'm all in favor of that. I think that's a wonderful thing. But part of the research, she says she was told by some of the researchers involved in this work, is getting a better understanding of how the human brain works so that DARPA can invent and finally develop a fully functional, autonomous artificial intelligence. That's the hurdle that they've not yet overcome.
And one of the other people that we interview in the film, Inhuman, Hugo de Garis. He's a famous artificial brain designer. He worked all of his adult life, actually the last 10 or 15 years of his life for the Xi'an University in China, right? Trying to develop an artificial brain. He was the one who first proposed to us, and he's in our documentary film, proposed to us that the way that they're going to accelerate reaching strong artificial intelligence, that moment when a synthetic brain comes online, a godlike entity, he says, millions and millions of times more intelligent than all of the humans in the world. He said the way that that would happen would be by integrating human brains with artificial intelligence systems so that the AI can learn from our brains how to reason and how to function and how to think and how to become essentially a deity, an entity.
Yeah. Well, there was a story in the news last week that robots are now watching YouTube videos to learn how to do things humans do. If they are sentient enough or aware enough to copy what they're seeing in a video, that is a strong step. And again, that was in the news. So if it's in the news, it's 40 years old.
Well, and I want to talk about that and how this might be fulfillment of prophecy in just a minute, because there were some scholars 100 years ago suggesting that this might be the fulfillment of prophecy. But first, we're going to tell you in just a moment how you can get a copy of the documentary film Inhuman. The next and final phase of man is here. And during the spot that you'll see, there is a reference to some mystery books. And Tom Horn is here to share with us the mystery books that people may receive.
And we're taking a moment to do this because we know that when they see the commercial, they can see what all the different $300 worth of product is going to be. But then it mentions we're also going to throw in 2 mystery books so that the phones aren't lighting up with people wanting to know what the mystery books are. Just understand that this is overstock. It's going to be the books of our choice. Here's some of the samples that I grabbed just before I came in here. Right now we have copies of the Disaster Survival Bible. We have this one, hardback book, Discovering the City of Sodom. This is a fascinating book. I can't hardly wait to get to read that one. Jack Graham's book, Unseen, on spiritual warfare. Here's the book, Survive the Unthinkable, a total guide to women's self-protection. There's great big gigantic books, you know, like the Researcher's Library, but it's books that are in overstock. And when we're sending out your $300 worth of product, which you're going to see in a moment in the commercial, they're also going to be adding 2 books from overstock. And then one other quick thing, in addition to the $300 worth of product, the first 3,000 people that order on November 17th, the countdown clock is on the top there. You'll see it on Skywatch TV. The first 3,000 people will also receive the WorldNet Daily produced documentary, The Last Pope. The Pope is in the news. This ties it into prophecy. The first 3,000 people will also receive that. So watch this commercial to find what else is going to be included in the biggest giveaway in Skywatch TV history.
Coming exclusively from Skywatch TV for a very limited time starting November 17th, 2015. When you purchase the new documentary film Inhuman and the companion book Dead Pets Don't Lie from Skywatch TV, you'll receive the largest giveaway in Skywatch TV history. An unprecedented $300 in free books, audio sets, and DVDs to add to your library or to give away as gifts during this holiday season. Included in this limited time giveaway are never before offered free audio sets. Over 30 hours of the most sought after interviews in history with global experts combined on a special 2-disc volume set discussing the unfolding genetic Armageddon now underway and what you need to know to survive the future. Featuring Something Transhumanism This Way Comes, The Coming Replacement Humans, The Days of Noah, The Coming Zombie Apocalypse, Conspiracy Theory, Psychotronic Warfare. Also, for a very limited time, in addition to the never-before-offered free best-selling audio sets, if you order before this special offer expires, you'll also receive the multi-part Skywatch TV special investigative report on Inhuman the documentary and Dead Pets Don't Lie, the award-winning book Forbidden Gates, Pandemonium's Engine, the best-selling DVD by dog behavior expert Joe Artis, The Natural Dog Training Method, the breakthrough book for pet enthusiasts everywhere, Do Our Pets Go to Heaven, 2 additional mystery books with a $40 value. And if you're one of the first 3,000...
Book of Revelation, Bullinger speculated that it could be, and now Sharon, you've actually put this into a presentation at a couple of prophecy conferences. Again, getting speculative here, but how might artificial intelligence actually turn out to be the fulfillment of prophecy?
I think if you take a look at the internet and at computer programs, that they are nothing more than electronics, essentially.
Yeah.
We're taking a look at the physics behind it. And if it were simply the physics, even that would be, I believe, a construct, a fit extension for spiritual habitation. But there may be something way beyond what we can measure in a lab when it comes to the human body and the software that we use. There may be something metaphysical that enables, that is a gateway, you might say, that enables a spiritual entity to inhabit the internet, to inhabit Wi-Fi, to inhabit a computer that is a strong AI that suddenly becomes a super AI that really sees itself as God.
With the human mind is essentially an electrochemical machine.
Yes.
And
well, in fact, the men like Ray Kurzweil look at us and they say, you are your connectome. That is the brain and all of the nerves that are connected to it. That gives you the sense of having a soul, of having consciousness. It's nothing more than that feedback system. Well, if that's what he really believes, then he won't be surprised then if a machine wakes up. Because they're modeling these machines, these computers, on us.
As best they can.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and another thing, you mentioned prophecy and Bullinger. When we were producing this documentary, Inhuman, what we tried to do was to kind of have a fair and balanced evaluation of everybody's different worldview. We certainly have our worldview, and we make it known in the film, but we didn't want it to be a gotcha, a setup on the transhumanists who were willing to sit down with us. And we got the world's leading transhumanists to sit down. People like Dr. James Hughes, people like Natasha Vita-Moore, who the New York Times has recognized as the world's first real transhumanist philosopher. And she does all this, what does she call it? Body design. I forget exactly what it's called, but she's designed the bodies of the future and how they're going to glow and different things. And we found, these people to be altruistic. I think that they really do imagine that their worldview is a better worldview, and we're going to lead to improving the human species. But because of our background, we also wanted to ask this question: could there be something prophetic about the transhumanist worldview, the genetics revolution, the biotech revolution? And so in this film, we also have people like Gary Stearman, who's been very familiar to our setting. Gary shines in this documentary. I mean, some of the most substantive and thought-provoking kind of questions. We have Chuck Misler, Chris Putnam, who is in the film, Paul McGuire, who was here with us recently. So we also went, and Noah Hutchings, the very last documentary that Dr. Noah Hutchings will ever be in was the one that we produced. And a little play on his name, we asked him if this could be the days of Noah, right? And Noah talked about what happened in the days of Noah, where we have a record of the first real genetic interruption into the species, where powerful beings took what God had made, crossed species barriers, created mutations, and ultimately the belief is by most of these scholars that it led to the great fiat of the flood, in which God had to wipe out, because Genesis makes it clear, all flesh, both man and beast, had been corrupted. Well, now, for the first time since the great flood, we are doing the same thing again, where we are crossing over species barriers. And it makes you wonder, besides a lot, what does God know about those barriers and why he put them there, and what he might actually be protecting us from? And the fact that now we're almost carelessly crossing over those species barriers again. But the question is it prophetic? And we wanted to also ask that question. And so it's part of this documentary film.
One of the experts that you consulted for the film, Wesley J. Smith, senior fellow from the Discovery Institute, tells a story that I think is accurately describes the transhumanist movement. He says it's like the classic Woody Allen joke. Two old ladies have been friends for years, and Fern says to Pearl that she's tried this new restaurant, and Pearl says, well, how did you like it? And Fern says, oh, it was terrible. The food was awful, the service was lousy, and the portions were so small. In other words, life is nasty, brutish, and way too short. So why do the transhumanists want to extend this mortal life instead of accepting the immortal bodies, the perfect bodies that we are going to get someday? We are all going to be post-human someday.
Right.
And the transhumanists, sadly, for the most part, don't recognize that fact. I've talked with Zoltan Istvan. We mentioned him previously. He's the author of a book called The Transhumanist Wager, running for president as a transhumanist party ticket. Very nice gentleman, but he's an atheist.
Right.
From his worldview, if you start with the presumption that there is no God, then his worldview as a transhumanist makes perfect sense. Others, Dr. Stuart Armstrong I've talked with from the Future of Humanity Institute, works with Professor Nick Bostrom there at Oxford. Again, they recognize the potential threat caused by a strong artificial intelligence, and yet they are so compelled by their concern for the human condition. I genuinely believe they think they're doing right for humanity. And we as Christians, I think, need to get ahead of this narrative. What can we say to the world that convinces the world, an unbelieving world, that we as Christians genuinely have their best interest at heart and that God has a better plan than living forever in the cloud?
Right, and I hope that pastors and churches and church leaders and Sunday school teachers and people that have home study groups, I do hope that they'll get this documentary, Inhuman, play it during some of those meetings, get a conversation started around this subject matter, because if we don't, if we remain silent, then we leave it in the hands of people who are atheistic, who have a godless worldview, to define for the future what the ethics are going to be, what the guidelines are going to be. And right now, they are the ones, the non-Bible believers are the ones that are writing the grant applications. They're getting tax dollars through different departments of the federal government, and they're writing the blueprint for what conditions and under what conditions we are going to allow humanity to be modified.
And our children and our grandchildren are being taught this in schools. They're being encouraged to learn this science. Some of the CRISPR stuff can be done in elementary school,
right,
if you have the right stuff.
And they're growing up and leaving the cradle with devices like these in their hands.
Yes.
They see the miracle of technology as it's developing day by day. We are offering them the miracle that's contained between the covers of a book that, frankly, most of their parents have never read.
Right.
And that is to our shame, as we are not training up our children in the way they should go. The documentary film, Inhuman, The Next and Final Phase of Man, is here. Tom Horn, Sharon Gilbert. The film available November 17th from Skywatch TV, skywatchtvstore.com. Please watch it. Educate yourself on it. This is a coming sea change in what it means to be human, and we must be prepared. Thank you for watching as we keep watch. I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is Skywatch TV.
Angels waging war in the unseen realm. Global events fulfilling biblical prophecy. Eternal life. What lies beyond mortality? From analyzing the paranormal from a biblical worldview to the discussion of cutting-edge science and technology. Conspiracy. Discovery. Special investigative reports. Unafraid to explore the challenging issues facing humanity. Welcome to another edition of Skywatch TV. Special investigative report.
For generations, we've depended on science to enhance our lives here on planet Earth, but now the science that we've depended on is fundamentally transforming our world and even what it means to be human. Welcome to Skywatch TV. I'm Derek Gilbert. This is the first of a series that we're calling Genetic Armageddon, as science rewrites the genetic code, not just of humanity, but of the creatures that the Lord has entrusted to us as stewards of His creation. In the coming weeks, you'll hear from experts such as holistic veterinarian Dr. Gene Hovey, talking about how the food that we are feeding our pets is actually rewriting their DNA. We'll also talk about how the Defense Department is researching ways to transform what it means to be human on a very basic level. Today, we'll focus on a new book, which will be coming out on November 17th, along with our documentary film, Inhuman, the movie. This is a book that will shock you, it will alarm you, it may make you angry. Dead Pets Don't Lie. Our guests today, the co-authors of the book, Donna Howell and Joe Artis. Welcome.
Hi, Derek. Thanks for having us.
This, well, I'll say again, this is a book that will leave the reader angry, I think. Joe, what was it that came to your attention that led you and Donna to write Dead Pets Don't Lie?
We started writing the book after we came into some information that was quite alarming about the underhanded practices of what's going on in the commercial pet food industry. And some of the information, let me just premise right away that as we're sharing some of the things we're going to talk about in this program, I already know in advance that a lot of the viewers of this program will probably hear some of what we have to say, and their initial reaction will be very similar to the reaction that I once had when I was first learning of it, and that is, what? This can't be real, right? They can't make this stuff up, right? Would it shock you, Derek, if I told you that all across the USA, right now, in commercial chain stores, popular, huge chain stores,
The big box stores,
right,
yep,
that tons and tons of the most popular commercial pet foods on the market actually contain euthanized dogs and cats?
When we have a pet, because we've had to put down several dogs in my lifetime, and it was a difficult experience. But you're telling me that after our dogs passed through the veterinarian's office, there was a good chance that they wound up back in the food chain for other dogs and cats?
There's a very strong possibility that they're picked up by what is known as a rendering plant, a rendering company. And what these rendering companies do is they don't want to waste that opportunity to increase their bottom line. This is in fact a source of protein, okay, in the eyes of the commercial manufacturers that are making the food. So why not? Why let those opportunities to gather that meat up go to waste, right? Well, now they're relying, of course, on the fact that they've got these big television campaigns and so forth, and people have this assumption that some or many factions within the government, that there are these benevolent arms of the government that is regulating this, which again is why this whole idea sounds preposterous when you hear it up front. But the idea that the FDA or some other branch of the government is insulating them from these issues, these poisons, these disastrous meats. And of course, many people don't know this, but the chemical pentobarbital that's used when you euthanize a cat or a dog remains in the meat through the rendering process.
It survives the rendering process.
It survives the rendering process. That's right. And I've got something. We during our investigation, the investigation that Donna Howell and I did over the last couple of years, as we were compiling the information for the book Dead Pets Don't Lie, we were able to retrieve documents from the FDA directly. So the following, I'm going to read you something. This is an admission directly from the horse's mouth. The FDA not only knows this is going on, but they're not regulating it to the degree that it avoids what we're talking about right now, where these animals are not scrutinized and pulled. They're absolutely rendered and put back into the pet foods. This is an excerpt directly from the FDA. Because in addition to producing anesthesia, pentobarbital is routinely used to euthanize animals, the most likely way it could get into dog food would be in rendered animal products. Rendered products come from a process that converts animal tissues to feed ingredients. Pentobarbital seems to be able to survive the rendering process. If animals are euthanized with pentobarbital and subsequently rendered, pentobarbital could be present in the rendered feed ingredients.
So the chemical that's used to euthanize, to kill the sick animals, these aged animals, survives the process and winds up back in the, what would the ingredient be called in the pet food? Crude protein?
We call it poisonous meats.
Yeah, but
yes, it absolutely survives the rendering process, and that's what I'm getting at. The FDA already knows this is happening. So when pets are euthanized at some of these shelters and vet clinics, they are then picked up by people that gather meat throughout the city. Some of this can be roadkill. Some of this, take for example, people that are raising cattle. Okay, let's say you have 1,000 cows on a cattle farm. Mm-hmm. Well, again, we don't want to waste these opportunities, right, to gather meat. Well, after all, this can be rendered and put into the protein powder that ultimately makes it into a ton of these commercial pet foods. So cattle that are diseased. The first time I ever heard the phrase food animal, okay, food animal, that's the term we're using for a lot of the animals that make it into the rendering process and then passed along into these commercial pet foods. What is a food animal? A food animal, according to the FDA, is any meat source within an animal that is not fit for human consumption. So this includes animals with cancer, visible tumors. I mean, some of this stuff is so gross, I really don't want to talk about it on television and people change the channel, but, but you know, cattle that are found dead or already dying. Chickens with protrusions that have huge tumors coming off the side of their body where they are so large because of the illness that they're inflicted by, they can't even walk. I've seen video of these chickens where they're just hobbling across the ground. Well, when they're dead or after they're dead, and sometimes these animals can be found dead in a pasture 2-3 weeks later, riddled with maggots, crawling with all kinds of life form and flies and things like this. Those are picked up by people that take all of this, the euthanized pets, the unfit for human consumption animals that are coming from farms in various places. All of them are bottlenecked to a rendering company where up a conveyor belt they go into basically a mulcher, and they're ground up into what is called a protein powder, and that powder is then sold to tons. I mean, I think it would really shock people if they knew the number of popular these people have TV ads constantly promoting the health and the wellness of their commercial pet foods, and these animals are ending up all in the same vat and then sold to unsuspecting consumers who again believe that there is some benevolent insulator out there within the government that is regulating this food and keeping the world of pet food safe for them, and they don't have to do any of the thinking.
Go ahead.
It sounds like what he is saying is so sensational that it can't hardly be believed.
Yes.
The Discovery Channel did what was called the animal rendering business or something like that, where Mike Rowe, the host of Dirty Jobs, went with the Discovery Channel and actually filmed the entire rendering process at a plant. The cow that they had picked up at the beginning of the episode had been dead for at least 4 days, they said. It was, like Joe said, covered in maggots. By the time this clearly diseased meat had been taken, they discussed how it was going from point A to point Z, which is the protein powder that's carried from the plant to wherever it goes. And they admitted in that episode that it is being sold to the highest bidder. They don't care where it goes and what it's used for. But the one thing that Joe didn't mention that I think is also crucial to the rendering process is the denaturing that happens. Close to the end, it's not just the heat process that goes in. And by the way, the rendering process, the pentobarbital does survive it, as well as a lot of other nasty chemicals that are in this big vat of the raw, they call it. But one of the things that they have to do is sanitize it or denature it from some of the other things that could cause immediate harm or death or whatever. And in that, they're adding other chemicals to the process, which would never be allowed in human foods. But what it does for the pet is it makes it so that the person feeding Fido every single day has no idea these denaturing chemicals, a glorified version of bleach, if you will, just to make it simple for the viewers, is actually doing a lot more damage over time, as well as second generation euthanasia, pentobarbital in the food over time.
And understand the denaturing process changes the shape of the protein in the protein powder, which means that the bodies of our pets don't treat these proteins coming through the same way they would if they were, say, eating a fresh ground beef, for example, or a fresh fish. The protein, after it's been heated and treated, the protein shape changes, which is critical because how the body responds to protein depends on the shape.
But also, Derek, because pounds equals dollars. There is no, and again, I realize this is hard for people to accept, but during the rendering process, when these people are creating protein sources and stuff, and by the way, that's when you pick up a bag of commercial pet food and you flip it over and it says meat byproduct. That's what that means. They don't want to identify a specific meat source like chicken or beef. Byproducts means, hey, it's just a big swarm of whatever we were able to get that month from the city, who's picking up dead animals from the streets. This could include roadkill. But also, when a supermarket gets a whole delivery of, let's say, fresh fish or chicken, when those meats at the grocery store go over the expiration, those are often then also picked up by, it's convenient for the grocery stores.
Sure.
A man will show up, he'll pick up all of those expired meats, and those are also delivered to the pet food rendering companies. And when they're all coming up the conveyor belt before they get mulched, they're not opened. They're not removing the plastic. They're not taking the meat off
styrofoam tray.
Styrofoam
that
tray.
all gets ground up into
the steak. The sticker. The ink on the sticker.
Any supermarket rejects.
Any supermarket rejects.
And everything tied to it.
And again, the euthanized pets, the roadkill. A lot of these cats and dogs are still wearing their flea collars. They don't remove the ID tags. And Derek, you know that in a recent interview that we did here at Skywatch TV, Dr. Hovey said that euthanized pets, chemicals like pentobarbital, might be the least of people's worries.
This is disturbing, but this is information that we need. As Christians, you may be wondering why we're focusing on pets. Check Genesis chapter 2. The Lord made us stewards of his creation. To take dominion of the earth means to protect it, guard it, and shepherd it with care. That's why we're focusing on this, and we'll talk more with the authors of Dead Pets Don't Lie as Skywatch TV continues right after this.
Coming exclusively from Skywatch TV for a very limited time starting November 17th, 2015. When you purchase the new documentary film Inhuman and the companion book Dead Pets Don't Lie from Skywatch TV, you'll receive the largest giveaway in Skywatch TV history. An unprecedented $300 in free books, audio sets, and DVDs to add to your library or to give away as gifts during this holiday season. Included in this limited time giveaway are never before offered free audio sets. Over 30 hours of the most sought after interviews in history with global experts combined on a special 2-disc volume set discussing the unfolding genetic Armageddon now underway and what you need to know to survive the future. Featuring Something Transhumanism This Way Comes, The Coming Replacement Humans, The Days of Noah, The Coming Zombie Apocalypse, Conspiracy Theory, Psychotronic Warfare. Also, for a very limited time, in addition to the never-before offered free best-selling audio sets, if you order before this special offer expires, you'll also receive the multi-part Skywatch TV special investigative report on Inhuman the documentary and Dead Pets Don't Lie, the award-winning book Forbidden Gates, Pandemonium's Engine, the best-selling DVD by dog behavior expert Joe Artis, The Natural Dog Training Method. The breakthrough book for pet enthusiasts everywhere, Do Our Pets Go to Heaven? 2 additional mystery books with a $40 value. And if you're one of the first 3,000 customers to place your order during this limited time offer, you will also receive, absolutely free, the groundbreaking WorldNet daily film, The Last Pope, featuring Tom Horn. Place your order beginning November 17th, 2015. Altogether, the never-before offered free 6 full audio series on a 2-disc volume set plus the 5 free books and 2 additional DVDs total an astounding $300 giveaway to add to your library or to give away as gifts during this holiday season. So it's urgent, the beginning November 17th, 2015.
This is not a conspiratorial thing. This is not just only if you go to a farm feed store and you find some obscure brand. I'm talking about big commercial chains. A ton of those pet foods are being preserved for unnaturally long shelf lives to help the person manufacturing it improve their bottom line. It gives them a larger window in which to sell the food. They're being preserved with chemicals that are just absolutely outrageous. They're devastating. The ramifications are devastating to the pet. And again, this is directly from some of the resources we were able to pull from the FDA. One chemical, I'm going to give you a couple examples of dozens. Propylene glycol. Used in pet foods to stabilize moisture, inhibit bacterial growth, maintain texture, and used as a sweetener. Okay, so that the pet is like, wow, this tastes really good. I'm wildly excited about it. It is largely considered one of the most dangerous preservatives in pet foods. It also happens to be a well-known ingredient in antifreeze.
I was going to say, that sounded familiar, and that's why we're told when you've got antifreeze around to keep it away from pets, because the sweet taste will attract them and
that's right.
kill them.
That's right. But see, when a person buys pet food and they take it home to see if Fluffy enjoys it, and Fluffy's just so ravenous about it, you know, animals are going to often eat based on smell and taste. So they're going to eat this stuff ravenously, and it's going to leave the person who bought the pet food with this impression, well, this must be a good one. It is known to cause illness in canines, can inhibit growth of an animal's good bacteria. This is why a lot of people will take probiotics. Can cause blockage or cancerous lesions in the intestines because of its use in moisture control. Considered to cause the most overlooked issues in canine health, including itching, dryness of skin. I saw that a lot. And do see it a lot when I'm in the field working with canines, various clients. You see that a lot. Dryness of skin, and you often find that they're feeding these cheap commercial dog foods. Dehydration, hair loss, anemia, and irregularities in the mouth, teeth, and gums, listed as grass by the FDA.
Generally regarded as safe.
Generally regarded as safe.
Generally recognized as safe.
Let me give you another really quick example. This is going to blow your mind. TBHQ is another very popularly used preservative in pet food, used as a preservative as well as an ingredient in explosives, varnishes, resins, and lacquers. And I don't mean to sound condescending, I really don't. It's just that I almost, as I'm reading this material directly from the FDA, I mean, it leaves me with this impression that, is there no limit? Is there seriously no limit to what they will allow to be used in commercial pet foods? Contains petroleum-derived butane, links to precancerous stomach tumors in labs, can cause damage to your DNA, considered safe by the FDA for use in pet food.
Yeah, and as we talked, we found out from Dr. Hovey that a recent study showing that dogs have expressed more genes that allow them to process carbohydrates, enzymes that allow them to process carbohydrates. It's not necessarily dogs were created to eat corn-based kibble. It's because we've been feeding them corn-based kibble. We're changing their DNA to adapt to the food that we've been given.
That's right.
Yeah. Donna, speaking of how long this can go on and how much is allowed, there's a chapter in the book called the Pass the Buck Regulation Game. What do you mean by that?
There's kind of a game of finger pointing that goes on in the pet food industry. The only regulatory authority, period, is the FDA. But let's say that, you know, John Smith decides that he wants to start a pet food company. He goes to the FDA and says, what is required? Straight off the FDA website, it's cited several times in the book, there is no pre-market approval necessary. Absolutely no pre-market approval required by the FDA.
Really?
You can see it on their website. So John Smith says, well, if I don't need anything from the FDA, what are they at least suggesting I follow? The FDA points a finger at both the PFI, the Pet Food Institute, and AFCO. So John Smith goes to these two different websites and says, okay, what is required of me? What do I got to do? The first thing that both AFCO and PFI say at the top of their website is we don't have any regulatory authority. We exist to create really, really high standard suggestion laws. We suggest that you follow these. We really hope you do, because if you follow all of these little laws and policies and regulations as far as, you know, the high standards of pet food, this is going to be your healthiest food. So John Smith says, okay, thank you, AFCO, for your suggestion, but if it's not regulated, I'm not going to follow that because I'm John Smith and I'm going to cut corners. So forget you, AFCO. What does PFI say? Same exact thing as AFCO. But all the while, FDA is saying you really need to be following these guys over here. So it's just a finger pointing game. It continues to go round and around and around. Finally, John Smith says, look, I don't have to follow what AFCO says. I don't have to follow what PFI says. The FDA says that there is not a pre-market approval standard. So there really is no regulation prior to the market, and it isn't until a pet gets hurt that somebody would have to step in and regulate.
As in the case some years ago where ingredients coming from China contained melamine and dogs began to die.
Yep.
With just a couple of minutes left, what do people do? How do we educate ourselves so that we aren't feeding our pets poison?
Yes, thank you for asking that, Derek. I want to make it very clear to the people watching this program that Dead Pets Don't Lie was a very serious multi-year investigation, but it's not just a book with tons and tons and tons, and it's not only limited to all of this terrible news. We knew when we took on this writing project that people would want to know, what can we do? We're not fatalist about this. There are things that a person can absolutely do to dramatically reduce the number of poisons and things, if not completely eliminate the poisons and the toxins that their pet is being exposed to. And if I may, let me just share just a few, and we're just going to skim the surface with this very broad stroke, but for somebody watching the program that wants to know where they can start immediately today. Number one, when you look at a pet food bag, flip it over, look at the label, and make sure that it doesn't say anywhere byproducts.
Or meat and bone meal.
Meat and bone meal. Avoid those like the plague. If you see poultry byproduct, meat byproduct of any kind, avoid that bag completely. Try to steer away from pet foods that use primary ingredients like corn and various grain types. The other thing you can do is go on the web. Type in the name of the brand you're considering and look for recalls associated with that brand. You'll often find that a lot of popular commercial foods have been pulled off the markets for various salmonella outbreaks and things like this, where they've been pulled back in. There are good brands out there that do not have recalls associated with it. When you're doing research, talk to a smaller boutique-style pet store. Go into a place where you're going to get more of a mom and pop shop. I have found that you get more educated type information as opposed to the big commercial type pet stores. And finally, look for bags that on the label read the ingredient sources that have been used, read like prairie raised or free range chicken and beef. And typically
wild caught fish.
That typically means that they're free range, that they're eating things that are native to what they should be eating. Cattle eating grass, chicken eating seed, and not being fed things like cattle, being fed things like genetically modified corn and then being turned around and rendered into pet food.
It's startling, it's stunning, and frankly, it's infuriating that this is allowed to go on. Dead Pets Don't Lie, an important new book from Donna Howell and Joe Artis, be released on November 17th, and along with Inhuman, the next and final phase of man is here, documentary film from Skywatch TV. Part of our series on genetic Armageddon. Science can be used for good things, but it can also be used to fundamentally transform God's creation. We thank you for watching. As we keep watch, I'm Derek Gilbert, and this is Skywatch TV.
Angels waging war in the unseen realm. Global events fulfilling biblical prophecy. Eternal life. What lies beyond mortality? From analyzing the paranormal from a biblical worldview to the discussion of cutting-edge science and technology. Conspiracy. Discovery. Special investigative reports. Unafraid to explore the challenging issues facing humanity. Welcome to another edition of Skywatch TV. Special investigative report.
The foods that we're feeding our pets may be killing them. This is Skywatch TV. I'm Derek Gilbert. We're in the middle of an investigation called Genetic Armageddon, how the science that we depend on to enhance our lives is fundamentally transforming the world around us. This coincides with the release of our documentary film Inhuman on how the transhumanist movement wants to rewrite the genetic code of humanity. But it also coincides with a book that I think is one of the most important that I've read in recent years, Dead Pets Don't Lie. It is a look at how what we are feeding our pets may not be what we think and how it's affecting their health. In studio with us today are the co-authors of this new book, investigative journalist Donna Howell and canine behavior specialist Joe Artis. Welcome.
Thank you, Derek.
In our previous discussion, we talked about the rendering process and how this crude protein or this meat byproduct or bone meal that goes into what our pets eat is created at these rendering plants and includes things that we would never imagine, like out-of-date meats from grocery stores, roadkill, diseased animals that die from natural causes or die prematurely before they're actually led to slaughter, things that we would never allow into the human food chain, chemicals that we would never allow, euthanized pets making it into pet foods. This is some pretty startling information, Donna, and you actually extracted some of this information from the rendering plants. How did you go about getting this information, and how difficult was it to find out what these rendering plants actually do?
Well, there is this very thick red tape line around everything. They are very secretive. They do not like to talk about what goes on behind their doors. In one specific instance, I was able to connect with one of the largest rendering plants in the U.S., and that is one of the interviews that's included within the book, but there were several others. In this particular case, when I called, I had some questions. I asked the first several people that I was able to get in touch with. They kept kind of, passing me around and giving me the runaround. Finally, I got a hold of somebody that completely, she stopped up. There was dead silence on the other end of the phone. At one point, it sounded like she was whispering. She didn't know how to answer my questions. My questions were such as, once these pets are euthanized at these surrounding shelters and they're collected and they're taken to your rendering plant, they are, in fact, rendered into a protein powder, correct? Most of the time, the answer to that question was, well, sure, we render them, we turn them into protein powder. Not an ounce of surprise in anybody's voice at this point. But then, what is that protein powder? Where does it go? What is it turned into? What does it do? Does it show up in future generation pet food? And at one point, the line completely went dead. I was told to hold, and then the line went dead.
Oh, just an accident,
so,
I'm sure.
Lines go dead sometimes. So I called back, and they told me to hold on, and they put me through to somebody who came in, I'm assuming from some kind of a legal department, who is, prepared for those kinds of questions. I had to hold on hold for a while.
Well, when they recognized that it was her, it's like, oh, it's her again. There was this shuffling, and then a new person was introduced.
Right.
And introduced herself.
And this gal named Christina, she was very, very upbeat and friendly, very hi. And so when I gave her the questions, is this what's happening with the pets? Actually, that powder is sold internationally to places like China. Now, she was very, very rehearsed in her answers.
Public relations expert, likely.
And it was almost like she repeated the same thing. Like, okay, so where did you say that they're sending? These are sent to places like China. And then my next question, what do they do? Where is this product ultimately going? Let's get to the bottom line. I was very nice, but let's get to the bottom line. What is it being used for? And then she answers, we are told to say that they are being used for things like fertilizer. And I said, hang on. You are being told to say that they are being used for things like fertilizer? And she says, we are being told to say that they are being used for things like fertilizer. And I said, well, with all due respect, if you are being told what to say and it's going internationally, how can we trust that that's really what it's being used for? Then she gets kind of quiet for a minute. She stumbles over her words a couple times. She didn't have a rehearsed answer for that one.
Trying to find the right spot on the flow chart. If then this.
Right. The rebuttal. Well, there wasn't a rebuttal for that one, and she finally just said, "That's true. We don't really know." And that's the whole conversations in the book. But ultimately, the red tape, it goes so high, and then you just don't get the answer you're looking for.
Well, we spent a lot of time in the previous program talking about some of the surprising things, shocking things that go into these powders and whatever that comes out of the rendering plant, and what then gets put into the pet food that our cats and dogs are eating. How is this affecting the health of our animals? I mean, we've got a dachshund that is the best dog we've ever had, and he's getting a little gray. He's like me; he's got the gray on the sides of the muzzle. He's 15 years old. How is Sam's health being affected by this off-the-shelf, store-bought pet food?
Well, it kind of depends on what you're feeding him, Derek. So,
it's probably not the recommended stuff. I mean, he's got a certain brand that he likes, and he always likes it, and it's the stuff that looks like, cheeseburger.
Sure, sure.
But in generally speaking, how is the health of cats and dogs being affected by these chemicals that are making their way into their food stream?
Well, in the last 15 years, we've seen a huge increase in what vets call mystery illnesses or rare diseases. When they simply can't explain why, let's say, a 6-month-old German Shepherd dies of stomach cancer. It simply defies any of the data that was gathered in previous generations before things like some of the chemicals we talked about in the previous program were introduced to using for preservatives. Okay, so there's the introduction of unnatural chemistry that's happening so that this food has a longer shelf life in which to sell. But I think we have to look at diet, because it isn't just stomach cancer, and that's not just an isolated case. Kidney failure. Okay, the dyes that are used. When you pick up a commercial bag of pet food, for example, and you look at it, you'll often see, and a lot of the main popular, big, colossal brand pet foods, you'll see a picture of a guy in a lab coat smiling. Well, this is almost certainly an actor that's placed on the bag to incite to the person looking at it that this food is recommended by a veterinarian.
Right.
You know, people feel more confident about buying a product when they see a picture of a guy in a lab coat.
A white lab coat conveys authority.
It does. But we have to look at diet because the data is staggering. The number of mystery illnesses and undiagnosed deaths is 3 times what it was in previous generations. And the number of cases of stillbirths, kidney failure at less than a year of age.
And the more that these things are coming up in the veterinary circles, the more the veterinaries look at this and go, well, that's really common actually in this breed or that breed.
That's right. That's the other thing, is that our expectations for things like the length of life are dropping, and that becomes the new normal based on what people are feeding their pets. Now, I want to say very clearly, I don't want any part of these programs to come off as though I'm inciting in any way that vets are the bad guys.
No.
You know, it's like Dr. Jean Hovey, who's going to be a guest in an upcoming program during this investigation in this series of programs. She even talks about when she went through veterinary school, receiving 2 hours of credited training by an individual who, we won't name the brand, but from a large commercial pet food brand, was the guy issuing the training. So he comes in under one of the big umbrellas from one of the big commercial pet foods, and he's the guy that's giving them their 2 credited hours of training on what nutrition should look like in pet food.
Yeah, and more than that, she pointed out that these major pet food manufacturers are actually funding chairs in the major veterinarian schools here in the United States. So the nutrition chair is funded by a company that's got a vested interest in the nutritionist finding that their food is recommended for your dog or cat.
That's also true with like kickback programs. Now, again, not every vet that has an incentive to sell you a particular pet food where he receives like you know, at the end of 30 days he gets a kickback check. Not every one of these people is a part of some big grand global conspiracy. But the fact is, unless they self-educate, a lot of vets do not have the required knowledge to then make a recommendation on what pet foods to feed your pet. Because
they are trained in treatment.
That's right.
They're not trained in prevention.
That's right. As a society, and you see this in people as well, as a society we're moving further and further away from holistic approaches to curing various things. Okay? Diabetics, for example, might develop diabetes. Some people have diabetes because of their diet. They develop diabetes over their lifetime to eating the wrong foods, lack of exercise, things like this. Well, often they'll see their doctor, and their doctor will say, we're going to give you a pharmaceutical response to a problem that your body is suffering under, instead of a holistic answer to pursuing the cure. So instead of using what God has outlined for the body in the first place, exercise, eating the right foods, they're going to give you pharmaceutical drugs that mask and deal with symptoms, right? It's the same thing in the animal kingdom. Pharmaceutical treatments to things that really often can be dealt with if better choices are made in terms of diet.
It's shocking, but important information. As we Christians are stewards of God's creation, we have a responsibility to do what's best for them because they can't choose for themselves when they're under our care. Our series, Genetic Armageddon, continues with the co-authors of Dead Pets Don't Lie on Skywatch TV right after this.
Coming exclusively from Skywatch TV for a very limited time starting November 17th, 2015. When you purchase the new documentary film Inhuman and the companion book Dead Pets Don't Lie from Skywatch TV, you'll receive the largest giveaway in Skywatch TV history. An unprecedented $300 in free books, audio sets, and DVDs to add to your library or to give away as gifts during this holiday season. Included in this limited time giveaway are never before offered free audio sets. Over 30 hours of the most sought after interviews in history with global experts combined on a special 2-disc volume set discussing the unfolding genetic Armageddon now underway and what you need to know to survive the future. Featuring Something Transhumanism This Way Comes, The Coming Replacement Humans, The Days of Noah, The Coming Zombie Apocalypse, Conspiracy Theory, Psychotronic Warfare. Also, for a very limited time, in addition to the never-before offered free best-selling audio sets, if you order before this special offer expires, you'll also receive the multi-part Skywatch TV special investigative report on Inhuman the documentary and Dead Pets Don't Lie, the award-winning book Forbidden Gates, Pandemonium's Engine, the best-selling DVD by dog behavior expert Joe Ardis, The Natural Dog Training Method. The breakthrough book for pet enthusiasts everywhere, Do Our Pets Go to Heaven? 2 additional mystery books with a $40 value. And if you're one of the first 3,000 customers to place your order during this limited time offer, you will also receive, absolutely free, the groundbreaking WorldNet daily film The Last Pope featuring Tom Horn. Place your order beginning November 17th, 2015. Altogether, the never-before offered free 6 full audio series on a 2-disc volume set plus the 5 free books and 2 additional DVDs total an astounding $300 giveaway to add to your library or to give away as gifts during this holiday season. So it's urgent that beginning November 17th, 2015, you order the new documentary film Inhuman and the companion book Dead Pets Don't Lie for only $39.95 to also receive the largest giveaway in Skywatch TV history. But please understand this offer will end without notification and is on a first-come, first-served basis starting November 17th. So be sure to visit skywatchtv.com to follow the countdown to the greatest giveaway in Skywatch TV history. Order the new documentary film Inhuman and the companion book Dead Pets Don't Lie for only $39.95 to also receive the largest giveaway in Skywatch TV history. Coming this November.
I'm not sure that the world is ready to receive this.
Tom Horn, Joe Ardis, Donna Howell, and the Skywatch investigation team join a host of global experts in the conclusion of a multi-year undercover inquiry that exposes what the U.S. government, the FDA, and monster corporations have been hiding from you.
We're talking about everything from the food that we eat to animals and pet animals to ultimately humans. Literally, what we have been doing with genetically modified crops, what we have and are doing with transgenically made animals, we fully intend to do with the human race. I mean, how many people know right now that the last scientist in Congress, Bill Foster, recently spoke before Congress. He wrote an article for The Hill in which he says that right now the top science departments in our government that dole out taxpayer-funded revenue have already been ordered to literally create the guidelines that are going to be used for genetically modifying the human race.
I think 90% of Americans would be shocked if they learned that their cats and dogs were eating these diseased meats and euthanized pets.
During our investigation, we were able to verify that if your pet Fluffy had been euthanized at one of these vet clinics or one of these shelters, it would be recycled into food byproducts, toothpaste, cosmetics, deodorant.
The stench is overwhelming. It's unbelievable.
Coming in November, an unprecedented, official and imposing undercover report that exposes what government agencies and greedy corporations are hiding about a genetic menace that is slowly, quietly, secretly killing and transforming all of creation.
they have made a Faustian deal with the devil. I'm talking about our government. They have sold out the best interest of Americans to greedy monster corporations that are in their back pockets.
Coming this November exclusively from Skywatch TV. Dead Pets Don't Lie. Inhuman the documentary. Survive the future.
Genetic Armageddon, science rewriting what it means to be alive on planet Earth, part of God's creation. I'm Derek Gilbert. We're talking with the co-authors of the new book, Dead Pets Don't Lie, Joe Artis and Donna Howell. We've talked a lot about the failure of the regulatory system to preemptively protect our pets. What does the FDA do when something comes along that we can demonstrate is harmful to our pets? Or how much evidence does it take for the government to step in and fix a problem?
Going back to what I had said when we spoke before about John Smith and his company, that he just starts without any pre-market approval. Let's say that his food makes a lot of animals sick. A person coming to the FDA and saying, you're the regulator, you're responsible for making sure that my dog or cat is going to be okay, and Fluffy and Fido are both dying because of as a result of this food. What are you going to do about this? The FDA's response is, in every situation, we would love to help you with that. We'll get right on it. We just need a few things. First, we need a chemical analysis of the food that you have been feeding your pet. And a chemical analysis has to come out of your pocket. You're entirely responsible for making that happen. So all the scientists that you have in your Rolodex, go find one and make the call. I mean, seriously, coming up with a chemical analysis from the FDA. They're not interested in helping you get that information. The second thing that they're going to need is a veterinary paper trail from the beginning of the onset, symptom onset for the illness of the animal. They want to be able to prove that this is something that's going to point back to the food that you're complaining about. Now, as Joe mentioned earlier, that's a little bit difficult, and it's kind of in a shady gray area because veterinarians, by the way, they are not the bad guys, but a lot of them, they are trained to cure, but not to prevent. And their knowledge of pet nutrition and rendering plants and all these horrible chemicals that go into the food in the first place, unless they're really holistic and they do a lot of self-training past the point of their own veterinary education certification program, unless they do that and they go beyond that, they don't think to connect the dots from Fido is sick to it's the food. They think, oh, let's see, what breed is Fido? Oh, that's right. He's one that falls into this, he's going to have this rare disease. And it's becoming more common. So the paper trail that you have to get for the FDA from your vet has to point back to the food being the problem. And a lot of times you're not going to get that pointing back that direction from the vet. Between these two, it has to prove that it's the food that is the problem. Now, here's where it goes to the third kind of tier.
Yeah.
Once you have paid all this astronomically high expensive testing and blood tests, urinalysis, you have to be able to prove that it's the food. Once you've got that and you go back to the FDA and you say, here you go, the FDA, at some point there's a mediation where this monster corporation is willing to pay you a lot of money out of court to keep your mouth shut. And this has been documented in a lot of court cases that are really, really hard to find. But if you read into it and you really look into it, you'll see that there have been a lot of out-of-court cases where people are paid to be quiet. So it only goes so far anyway, and the monster corporation is still, despite all the urinalysis, blood tests, chemical analysis of the food, the veterinary, despite all of that, they are still allowed to continue their poor practice within the food industry, and the FDA never really had to do anything about it.
Because they settled out of court, the FDA doesn't say you have to pull your food from the market and change the formulation. Basically, because it's settled out of court, the FDA says, okay, as far as we're concerned, this problem is solved.
Well, the FDA doesn't have any reason to spend its money, resource, time, talent, and energy pulling something from the market if they say, okay, guys, we're about to get in the middle of this. How's it going? And then everybody says, never mind.
We've settled out of court. These people got their money. They can go buy a new dog, and everybody's happy. And all the other poor dog and cat owners out there are still stuck thinking that what they're feeding their pet is helpful.
Yeah.
Besides health issues, Joe, as a canine behavior specialist, how do you see this affecting the behavior? I mean, the old saying, we are what we eat.
Right.
I presume the same thing holds true for our pets.
Sure.
How is this affecting dog behavior?
Sure. I won't name brands, but I've been in a lot of homes dealing with the kinds of dogs that a lot of traditional trainers don't want to deal with, particularly aggression and things like this. The ones that aren't suitable, example, for dog training class, okay? The ones basically that are on the brink of being euthanized. Food isn't to blame for every single one of these cases, but often what I have found is when a dog is labeled by the owner stupid or unfocused or scatterbrained or stubborn, when I've looked at what is being fed, you can see, missing pieces of fur. You can see the attention span might be being affected by the fact that it's a grain-based food, which is totally not native to what a canine should be eating in the first place.
Right.
And in a lot of ways, it's no different than if you put a child. I love Dr. Hovey's Spaghetti-O example that you'll be seeing soon on another up-and-coming program. But it would be like if you put a child on nothing but ice cream. Well, that child would probably live for a while on ice cream, right? But what's it going to do to the child's attention span? What's it going to do to the child's mood? Is he going to receive instructions from parents? Is he going to behave in a way that's conducive to the kind of life they want to build? It's no different with our pets. So when your pet is giving you all of these visual symptoms of irritability and missing pieces of fur and scratching and moaning and pawing, it's amazing to me that oftentimes food is like the last thing on a person's checklist. We've tried everything. We went to YouTube. We looked at training videos. We hired a trainer. This dog just doesn't pay attention. I'll give you a perfect example. And of course, we talk about this in the book, but a man named Shane calls me in. He's got a 12-year-old dog. The dog is wrapped in a sweater. I said, why is the dog wrapped in a sweater? He says, well, without the sweater, the dog eats through the skin and begins to pick and, kind of piecemeal and chomp away the skin. He's very irritated. And we've been told that it's a mystery allergy, which, by the way, is probably mycotoxins making its way into the pet food in the first place. Different subject, but molds with these cheap grains where they're stored for a really long time, often they'll end up with what's called a grain mite. Grain mite is like a sister mite to the dust mite. But grain mites move these mold spores. Grains are stored inappropriately. They're succumb to things like moisture. So the grains end up with mold spores and grain mites, which ultimately gives rise to microfungi and what are called mycotoxins, which, by the way, is deadly.
And it doesn't look like a bread loaf when it molds. I mean, this is all completely naked.
Right. It's invisible to the naked eye. But in any case, not to get off point here, but the point is that a lot of these grain, and it was a grain-based food is why I bring this up, but that is one of the largest contributors to hair loss, skin irritability, and it's almost always labeled by a veterinarian as a mystery allergy. Well, we don't know. It could be a mystery allergy. I looked at what this person was feeding. This was a man with means. He had plenty of money, but he's a perfect example of someone who walks into a commercial store and just makes a selection based on what they're being told or what bag looks like the dog they own. And I looked at it very briefly and I said, this is a very cheap, grain-based food, probably riddled with mycotoxins. This is going to